Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming. We will begin with prayers. If you are familiar again, please join me. And if not, then you can close your eyes and be with us during the prayers. Om Agyantimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Great, thank you. Do you think it's a bit noisy here? What could we do? Maybe I'll just slide the door a little bit. Great. Okay, so thank you again for coming, and I very much welcome everyone to this class. And I really encourage active participation during the discussion. So if you like, please come forward a little more, maybe a quarter inch, and occupy some of our special seats right here, which are only for business class customers, which we know you are. So please feel free to do that. I want to introduce today's topic. Today we are going to talk about friendship, as mentioned in the Gita. And so before we talk about that, I think we should have like an introduction and get to know each other. But so tell us your name, and you can tell us one quality that you would like to have in a friend, in a close friend. One quality that your friend must have, otherwise it's a deal breaker. So again, tell us your name and tell us one quality that you would like to have in a friend. Do you want to start back there?
Ishwari Priya.
Thank you, Ishwari.
I'd like to have my friend not to judge me always.
I'm sorry, I have to close that door.
Okay, I'm going to ask the kids to just come.
That would be helpful, thank you. Shri Radha Muralidhar ki jai. Do you want to tell us the answer?
Yeah. So I'd like my friend to not to judge me always.
So non-judgmental. Okay, wonderful. Back there. I'm sorry? Ujwal? Okay, thank you. Harsha, do you want to go next?
Trustworthy.
Okay.
Very warm. Supportive.
Thank you. There is some special effects. Please tolerate that. I'm sorry? No, that they should just move. I don't think they will cool down.
My name is Sherry. What qualities? Okay, how about two?
Two is good.
I think the first is compassion for animals would be number one, and the second would be honesty.
Honesty and compassion. Thank you.
My name is Paras Kumar.
Thank you. So goodness in a friend. Thank you. Can you hear back there? Okay. You're not sure what you want from a friend? Okay. Thank you. So he can be a good friend. He's not judgmental. You guys can be good friends.
My name is Arvind, and I think two of the qualities were taken in effect by others. One is trustworthy, compassion, and I think responsible.
Responsible for what?
Responsible for
Just a responsible person. That's fine.
perform their duties, or that if they're a friend, then they're responsible to be a good friend.
Okay. Wonderful. So there is a friendship which begins in the Gita. So for those who are familiar, the Gita begins with a friendly talk between Krishna and Arjun. And that talk happens to be starting on a battlefield. And at that time, Arjun, who is Krishna's friend, is very awkward. First of all, he's very excited to fight. And then they decide to take his chariot in the middle of the armies to observe the armies. And then he goes in a very awkward situation. And he starts to have symptoms of anxiety and depression right there in the middle of a war. And on either sides, both sides of this war, I just want us to imagine this scenario is not just like 15 people like are here, but there's millions of people who are ready to fight, and the war has been announced. And then he feels that this is not right for him, he's not going to do it. So at that time, he turns to Krishna and he starts to speak from his heart. And he finally winds up ending in a place where he's again confused himself and cannot figure out what to do. And then he actually surrenders to his friend Krishna and tells him that, please, now you become my teacher instead of being a friend, and tell me what I should do. So that's the beginning of the Gita, is beginning with friendship. And I thought we will elaborate more on this, how friendship plays a role, how can friendship play a role in our spiritual life, especially later. So I want to start like usually we start with reciting a verse. We are doing the 6th chapter, which describes the process of eightfold yoga. Does anybody remember what are the 8 things? What are the 8 folds in the yoga system? This is one type of yoga, it's called Ashtanga yoga system, and this chapter is about that. And we talked about it last time, that's a hint. Does anybody remember what are the different 8 aspects of this yoga system? Does anybody know any one of those? Yes, this is called Dhyana Yoga in summary. Ashtanga is also called Dhyana Yoga, and there is various things involved in it. There's 8 things involved. That is why it's called Ashtanga, which is called 8 limbs. So what are those 8 things? Or what is one of those 8 things? You can guess? Okay, if we were to make a wild guess, what would you guess is involved in 8 components of the yoga? Yes? Yes, so there is, okay, let's go back. There is 4 types of yoga described in the Gita. First is karma yoga, which means yoga through action, which is kind of a sub-independent yoga system, okay? The second aspect is jnana yoga, which is yoga through knowledge. And the third is Ashtanga or Dhyana yoga, which is what I'm asking about. And the fourth is Bhakti yoga. And last time we saw about this comparison of the train of yoga. Does anybody remember that? How they're interdependent. So now we're focusing on this chapter, which is talking about Dhyana yoga, the third type. And within that Dhyana yoga, there's 8 things that one is supposed to do. So if you were to guess, since you're saying that you guys don't know, what would you guess as is a part of this Dhyana yoga system? That's very close, yeah. Meditation is one of them. Thank you. Any other things that could be included in this yoga? Mm-hmm. Yes.
I remember what we did was that
Okay, well, this is great. We started with meditation. Any other thing that you can imagine being included in yoga? Concentration. Okay, so focus of the mind. Anything else included in yoga? Asana is included. Okay. So we got 2 things down. Concentration, we got 3 things down. They're actually in the 8, one of those 8 things. 3 of those 8 things. Anything else? I'm sorry? Well, we are just like understanding how we think about yoga right now. I'm not necessarily asking what is the correct answer. I'm asking what you think is included in this 8-part yoga, or what you think relates to yoga. So somebody said asana. I'm sorry? Diet restriction. Restricting the diet, pratyaharas kind of thing. Okay. So like following different kinds of diet, like losing weight or gaining weight, etc. You said something? So breathing exercises, pranayam. Okay, we got like just few more left. We're pretty close. They seem very obvious, right? So tell us more about that. What do you mean by that?
I know, like old ancient sages, what they used to do, like whatever austerities they used to do,
Mm-hmm.
discipline themselves, the body, mind.
So disciplining the mind and the body. Okay, so that I think we covered most of the territory there. So beginning with positive and negative discipline. Positive discipline is wanting those things which are good for you, and negative is not doing things which are supposed to harm you in the long term. That's the first 2. Then the second is asana, which is trying to stabilize the body so that it can be used, it can be controlled better, and it can be used for a higher purpose. The third is doing the same thing, but this time with the breath. The fourth is, so we got yam, which was the first one, niyam, we got that. And we got asana, we got pranayam, and then we got pratyahara, which is more intense sense control than the first positive and negative restrictions. And then you eventually end up in this focused meditation called as samadhi, which I think you talked about. You did. So that is the Eightfold Yoga system. So we are talking about that in this chapter, and this verse is a suggestion about how this person who is a yogi deals with the mind. What does this person do about the mind? Because as we saw, there is at least three components here which are talking about positive and negative discipline, and which are talking about regulation. However, the mind is a monster in many cases, especially if you try to go against it. If you try to go with it, then it is not monster in the short term, but in the long term can become potentially a monster. So, of course, I'm giving a negative connotation on purpose. So this verse talks about how the yogi deals with the mind, these 2 verses. Let us recite the Sanskrit, because this is what we do, and it helps us to get deeper into the meaning. And let's try one part of this verse at a time, and you can repeat after me. Uddhare Atmana Atmanam Natmanam Avasadayet Atmaiva hi Atmano Bandhur Atmaiva Ripur Atmana. Great. So is there any familiar words here? Every time we do this, there is so many words which are used here, which are common jargon these days, and I'm sure you'll find some here. So any familiar words here? Atma, you want to tell us what do you understand by it? Atma, okay. Atma is the soul, so the Atma can refer either to the mind, body, or the soul. And here it is referring to the mind. But yes, also means the soul. Yes. You said something there? Tell us more about it. Yeah, so Bandhu is a special category of friend, a very, very close friend, who knows that person is very close to and knows, how you've been acting and how to push your buttons and how to not push your buttons. A very close friend is a bandhu. Otherwise, there are other words used for just acquaintances and, not close friends. Any other words? There's pretty much not many words here. The word Atma is repeated many times. So any other words here that you guys know? Uddhar is also maybe a familiar word. It means to elevate. So let's look at the word for word. The first line means Uddhared Atmanam Atmanam. So this is very interesting, the Sanskrit language. If you do not have proper guidance and teachers or expertise of studying it for at least 10 to 15 years by yourself, it can become very confusing. And this is how it can become confusing. So the first line literally means that one should elevate oneself with the help of the self. So naturally we would ask, what the heck does it mean? Like, how do you elevate yourself with the self? You have to be outside the self to elevate yourself, right? So how does the self elevate itself? Imagine you're trying to lift something up. Like you want to push a boulder. You want to be outside the boulder, then you can push something. But here it is saying elevate the self with the self. So it becomes confusing. And then it can become more confusing as follows. Na atmanam avasadayet. Which means do not degrade the self with the self. So again, which means you have to be outside the self to degrade it. And this self is the friend of the self. And that is Atmaiva Atmano Bandhur is a friend, a very special friend. And Atmaiva Ripur Atmana, which means that the self is the enemy of the self. So to solve this, to address this confusion, we have expert translators who have done the job easy for us. So I would request one of you to please read the first translation. This is the English translation of the Sanskrit. Would anyone like to volunteer? Yeah.
One must deliver oneself with the help of their mind and not degrade oneself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and their enemy as well.
Okay, that's that one. And then this is another one. Let us try to recite this one too, because we have only 2 verses this time. And this is a continuation of that. So please repeat after me. Bandhur atmanas tasya yenatmaivatmana jita anatmanastu shatrutve varteta atmaiva shatruvat. So any new words here? Any new and familiar words? Yes, what is that? So there's an enemy here. There's also called in the previous verse as Ripu. So same thing. Anything else? Yes? You said something? Yes, so that means a very close friend. So this is also a very close, let's read the translation for this one.
For one who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, one's mind will remain the greatest enemy.
So this is a combination, this is a context given, and after this verses, Krishna will tell how the yogi deals with the mind. But first, before you want to deal with something, you want to understand what it is, and to what extent you have to deal with it. So here in this text, there is several keywords. One is this conditioned soul. So we understand what a soul means, right? A soul is a spiritual entity, which is, what is it? It's just a soul. What is what is the soul according to the Gita? Not destroyed. Cannot be destroyed. Right. Anything else is about this soul thing? Can you translate for us, please? Those are 3 characteristics of soul described as the soul is eternal, Sat, and the soul is full of knowledge and full of bliss, the real bliss. Those are the 3 characteristics of the soul. Yes, and there is negative characteristics that the soul is not able to be destroyed. Soul is not going to be moistened by fire. The soul is, etc., etc. So there is a description by negation. This is a positive description also. But now, what is a conditioned soul? Yes, but what is it? So soul is this pure thing which is full of eternal, full of knowledge and bliss, and we understand it to be separate, just like we understand the duality or the dichotomy between matter and spirit. So this is that spirit that we are talking about, whereas matter is temporary, spirit is permanent, eternal. But what does this conditioned soul mean? What kind of condition are we talking about? Are we saying that that the existence of the soul is conditional? That sometimes it is soul, sometimes it is not a soul?
No, it's conditioned by the mind, our thoughts. Like it's taking us away from the real purpose of the soul, which is the spiritual aspect, and we become more materialistic, so we get conditioned by everything around us, thoughts.
Okay, so what she's saying is the soul is supposed to do something, but it ends up doing something else, and that is because of conditioning. Right? Any other thoughts about what this conditioning means? Trained. Okay, so it's undergone academic training. It's gone to the academia and acquired some training from there and has become conditioned because of that. Any other thoughts? What does the conditioning mean? Have you ever felt that you're conditioned? So you know, you have first-hand experience. So tell us what conditioning means and how does it apply to the soul?
Material activities,
I'm sorry?
engaged in material activities.
So the soul who is materialistic is a conditioned soul. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other understanding of this conditioned soul?
Admittedly, I can't speak for the soul, but conditioning, generally speaking, in all areas of our lives and reality.
Can you shut the door? Sorry, I'm with you.
Over and over again about ways of behavior that are acceptable in the kind of culture that we live in. So we are conditioned to believe this, that, and the other thing 24/7, meaning we are taught repeatedly to identify with many different kinds of behavior based on what the society is trying to convince you of.
So externally we have gained some behavioral skills, and referring back to the training which we have been taught, we are saying we have been taught, but actually we have learned. There's a difference that being taught means like a kid goes to school and kind of helplessly gets taught and they just learn whatever is being taught, but after some point they can choose not to go to school. But the fact that we are still conditioned souls, that means we are still continuing to learn the same stuff. So conditioned soul. Any other thoughts here about this conditioned soul? Anyone else? I think it's a very important term because it refers to us. So we better understand it. It is about us. Yeah, so tell us more about it.
Can you speak up a little bit so we can hear you?
I said it's like that, I would say pronouncing his name correctly, Pablo's dog. He conditioned it by this, every time the dog heard the bell, it would salivate because he would get food. I think I remember correctly, something like that. So as she said, we've been taught repeatedly.
So is anybody familiar with Pavlov's experiment here? It's a very ancient experiment done back in the ages. I'm joking, it's not that old. So what happens in the experiment is that a dog is naturally attracted to food. But this Pavlov, who happened to be studying digestion in dogs, he had nothing to do with psychology initially. He was just like, that's why he had dogs and that's why he had dog food, because he was studying how the body responds to food. So it so happened that while he was doing this experiment, he used to call his dog by blowing a whistle. And then he observed that the dog is salivating to respond to the whistle after some point, because the dog is expecting food after the whistle. So she's saying that that is how we are conditioned. So that means that we have something called food which we originally like, and we have the whistle which has nothing to do with pleasure. So what would you call the food and what would you call the whistle? Or anyone else? Like, do you understand? Is everyone with me? There is a food which is naturally attractive, stimulus, unconditioned stimulus, and there is a response which is there to the food, which is unconditioned response, is salivation. But the stimulus of whistle, which has nothing to do with pleasure, causes pleasure to the dog. So like that, for a conditioned soul, what is the whistle and what is the food? So the food is something that, the hint is that the food is something that the dog cannot live without.
The dog comes to understand that the whistle and the food are very closely connected.
Are they also, there is some temporal correlation. They are very, sorry to use very scientific term, they are very close in time. So one follows the other. But apart from that, they are very independent things also. You could blow a whistle at any time, and you could eat food without blowing a whistle at another time. Right? So what does that food and whistle mean for us? I know 10 seconds is enough to build pressure, but you guys are tough.
Reward and retribution is often, I'm thinking more in sociological terms rather than in religious terms, conditioning that results in some kind of positive energy or reward is largely what people are attracted by, and that which they are conditioned to feel is not going to be beneficial. Well, they would be critical of it, I would assume or hope, so that begins the process of examination and discovery.
So that is also a type of conditioning, which is conditioning through action, which is commonly called as karma, which means that that is an aspect of conditioning which in psychology called as operant conditioning, where you do an activity and you get retributed for it or you get rewarded by it in a mechanistic way, which is partially beyond your control. We cannot control all the outcomes of our work, but we can control how we respond to the outcome. However, if we do not have the knowledge of how to respond to the outcome, then we become conditioned by that work. Because if we get a good reward, then we tend to like that work and we'll do more of that work. And if we get a retribution, then we will go away from that work. So that is the first type of conditioning. And the second type was what she described, which is the day-to-day conditioning, which is through what is called in the Gita as Indriya Priti, what is called in psychology as classical conditioning, which she was referring to, which is a conditioning based on unconditioned stimulus, like the whistle. So one could learn to get pleasure from anything which has nothing to do with pleasure. There are so many examples of that. There are so many philias, right, which are loves, associations with things which have nothing to do with love. And so that these are the things that these are the two ways in this the soul becomes conditioned. One is through Indriya Priti and other is through karma. And during the karma also there is a lot of conditioning going on. So therefore it seems like a complex situation. And therefore here it is suggested that one must learn to deliver oneself with the help of their mind. If we do not have the motivation, then why would we learn to deliver ourselves, right? So to understand what is the motivation, we should understand what conditioning means. So this is what it means to be conditioned. Elsewhere in the Gita, Krishna says that, it's in the 8th chapter, I believe that he says that this conditioned soul is born at a time which cannot be traced back, and it has always been having two things. One thing it always had is Ichha, which means I like this, and I really like that very much. And the second is Dvesha, that I hate this thing or I hate that person. These two things have been with this conditioned soul forever. So this is the result of conditioning. When you go through, imagine like a chamber, a conditioning chamber. So you go through that chamber and you come out with these two things. That kind of gets stuck with you, Ichha and Dvesha. And then those grow over lifetimes. Even in this lifetime, as we practice our life, if we live our life, our likes and dislikes will change and they will become more and more complicated or more and more fine-tuned, let's say, about what we like and whom we don't like. So this is something that the soul carries, but a soul who is not conditioned or has overcome their conditioning will not have those likes and dislikes. They will not specifically like a stimulus or not, or like an object or like a person, and not specifically hate an object or hate a person. So now again going back to the motivation. So what's the big deal of having likes and dislikes? Everybody has them, right? I mean, how can you live without that? If you don't have likes and dislikes, you'd be open to anything and everything. That goes back to this idea that, as now just cutting back the story from multiple lifetimes to our present lifetime as we were born, we naturally became open to suggestions. Like, for example, somebody told us that these are your parents. That was a suggestion. And we kind of believed it. Okay, it seems reasonable. These people are loving me, and they seem to be taking care of me, and they're actually going out of their way to help me, etc. So we followed that suggestion. There could be other suggestions. Somebody said you should go to school. And everybody is going to school. We should also go to school. So we went to school. And then in school, there are several suggestions made from our friends, made from teachers, and so on. And even as adults, we remain open to suggestions of what other people think the worldview is. So this conditioned soul is always open to suggestions, and that is why it becomes more and more conditioned. And that is an important characteristic. But now here we are talking about this friendship with the mind. So one might think that if, let's say, you don't like a person, right? You can say that, okay, I respect you, but I don't want to be friends with you. You're in your own space, I'm in my own space, things are cool, just take it easy. Don't interfere my space, and I'll not interfere your space. You can say that to any person, and a reasonable person would accept that proposal and just live their life. But the mind will not accept that proposal. So it is not that it is an optional thing whether you want to befriend the mind or not. The mind is someone who is constantly giving suggestions. You can just remember how many suggestions your mind gave today, and how many options it presented to you. And then it's if you start writing them down, I'm sure you'll run out of all the trees in this world in a few years. If you start writing down all the suggestions that a mind gives in a day. So the mind is constantly talking, giving suggestions, like a friend who is always talking, just cannot stop talking. And this friend, however, is a very, very close to you. That friend knows exactly what you like, exactly what you dislike, and it keeps talking and giving suggestions to you. So therefore, we think about this verse and say that, okay, well, is it really like I have to make my friends with my mind, or can I just be the way I am? What's the big deal about befriending this mind? If it's my enemy, I'll just stay away from it. So the reason it doesn't work is because this mind is inside our head. It is not something that is outside of us, which we are trying to dissociate with and trying to control. It's something within us. And that is why it is important to think that this is not an optional thing, or this is not a voluntary friendship, but this is a forced relationship that a conditioned soul has. It will be ideal to not have a forced relationship, right? Who likes that? You're kind of put together with a roommate that you really don't like, or you end up liking someone, and then they turn out to be very different than what you thought, and then there is a heartbreak. But imagine after you know that somebody is not good for you, being forced to stay with them forever. That is the situation of the conditioned soul, that the conditioned soul is mechanically forced. I'm not saying forced by divinity, but mechanically forced, or is kind of forcing itself to stay with the mind forever. So that is our situation with the mind. And that is why now let's bring up this question a little more to the front about what friendship really means. So I wanted this, and it's an open-ended question, I understand, but I want to get maybe a few words from you. The first thing that comes to your mind when we hear the word friendship.
Honesty.
Yeah, thank you. So a mind will honestly tell you what's going on. Now we want to relate all of these qualities back to the mind. The mind is going to be honest, all the time. Or it can be dishonest, and it can be cheating. So we would like to make our friends with the mind if it is very honest. So that's one quality that you think of friendship. Anything else that comes to your mind when you think of friendship?
Consistency.
Consistency. That's a very important important quality, especially in the difficult times when a friend is consistent. It helps a lot. Anything else? Trust. Thank you. Fun. Thank you. Anything else? Dependable, trustworthy. Thank you. So, we have this idea we just discovered here that the mind has two extreme positions which it can simultaneously take. So, on one extreme, the mind is giving all positive suggestions and suggestions which are very, very useful and seem very beneficial. And on the other extreme, it is behaving like an enemy, which is giving completely opposite suggestions and is forcing us to do things that we really don't want to do. You can imagine a habit that you're trying to stop, that you do it once and you say, okay, next time I'm never going to do it. And then what happens next time? Most likely you end up doing it. And what has happened between the time you did it first and the time you do it for the second time? The mind has convinced you. The mind has given very, very good suggestions that so that we end up doing the same activity again, which we don't want to do. So in these situations, the mind acts as the enemy, and other situations, it acts as a best friend. So it is not that it is either a best friend or a best enemy or an enemy, but it's both at the same time. That is the nature of the conditioned soul. But a person who is not conditioned, then the mind is always their best friend. So what does this friendship mean? Can you tell us a little? Give us more things that come to your mind when it comes to friendship. So somebody said supportive. So let's say I'm doing something which is not in the long term going to help me, but I really expect my friend to support me because that person is my friend. If you don't support me, I'll kick you out of my life. So that the mind can support us in terrible activities. You can see in people who are very cruel in the world. We say that they have lost their mind. But have they lost their mind? They haven't lost their mind. It's just the mind has become the enemy. Right? So the mind can be very supportive like that. Any other quality that a friend should have? Patience. Patience with us.
Patience with themselves, patience with people, patience with the world not always doing what you want it to do in relationship to the capacity to change it.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Any other qualities of the mind? So supportive is contextual. It depends on what the mind is supporting us in. So that is good depending on what we are doing. It's not always nice to have a supportive friend. That's the conclusion of our discussion so far. Anything else? Any other qualities of the mind? Any other qualities of the friend? A good listener. Okay. Okay. So active listener. So the mind is always listening. Imagine a friend who listens to you and listens to you and listens to you and also gives good suggestions. But all of that is in context of what you already like. So that really doesn't help so much. It's nice if we need to define a larger context to actually benefit from friendship. That's what we are trying to get at. Let's see another point here. Any other qualities of a friend? Understanding. So supportive, understanding, similar, right? Anything else? Non-judgmental. That is good to get a conversation started. If a friend is judgmental, you can never talk to them. But you can talk to a non-judgmental friend easily. So a friend could also give a negative suggestion, right? Just like a mind can give a negative suggestion, a friend can give a wrong idea. And if it doesn't comply with our worldview, we tend to move away from that friend. So imagine like two big circles intersecting. One circle is you, another circle is your friend. And the reason why they're your friend is because your circles are intersecting. And what do these circles represent? They represent your worldview and your perspective on the world. And the other circle represents the friend's worldview and their perspective on the world. And somewhere you've found an intersection there, and that's why you guys are together, or you people are together. Now, the point is that these worldviews are completely independent and completely relative. So, for example, I am seeing a specific view. I'm seeing just from a physical point of view. I am seeing that there is about 20 people sitting in this room, and they're trying hard to make sense of what the heck this person is talking about. And then there is, there is some kids in the background making some noise, and there is something going on the altar, and I can hear some sounds, I can see some things. But a person from another species, for example, a living being from another species doesn't see the same world as me. So it's going to become very hard for me to. So they are living in an independent world, and I'm living in an independent world. We can also take a person from the same species. Imagine that someone you really hate. There must be at least one person you hate, right? Can you think of someone? If not, that's very good. But if you can think of someone, then what is it that makes us hate someone? That their worldview doesn't intersect with ours. Their perspective doesn't intersect with ours. So they're seeing the world in a different shade of colors, and we are seeing the world in a completely different shade of colors. There is no common colors between our view, and that is why we hate someone. And if there is common colors, then we like someone. However, how are these perspectives defined? That is something we will talk about now. So the point that we brought up so far is what this friendship quality means, and how to define friendship to be actually useful or not requires a larger context, and that is the context of spiritual elevation that we will bring in, that the Gita brings in. That it is not about just making good or bad suggestions, because they are relative. It is not just about having friends or enemies. Or let's talk about this idea of positive thinking. So let's go to the bottom of this question a little more and ask this question about what is a positive thought. When would you call a thought positive? I'm sorry? Agreeable. Okay.
When it is neither negative nor harmful to ourselves or to others.
Okay, it's hard to define it that way if you remove the negative part. So not something that is not harmful to us or others is positive. Any other thoughts on positive thoughts? What does a positive thought mean? People. Okay.
Is it a positive or relative? Maybe positive for us.
Yes, so we are just talking about what we mean by a positive thought from a philosophical perspective. So that's a very good point, that it is relative. That we have we talked about these two things like icha and dvesha, likes and dislikes. So whatever if we have similar likes and dislikes, and we agree on things, and we talk about those things, and we call those as positive thoughts. But let's go a little deeper. Beyond that, she said that doesn't harm anyone, which kind of everyone agrees on, right? Would you call a thought as a positive if it involves harming someone else?
Depends what the intention.
Okay, tell us more.
Arjuna's thoughts were not positive, but Krishna reminded him of his intentions or why he was in the battlefield.
But Krishna could have changed his mind so that Arjuna wasn't so confused. And I said once before, you could have put up the peace sign and say, no, I'm not killing anyone, no matter what you say.
There is a history of that going on in the Mahabharata, which is the bigger context around the Gita, in which there is some peace negotiations going on to avoid warfare. However, they fail miserably, and then therefore the war is on. So we'll not get into that. But harming someone can be a positive thought or can be a negative thought. For example, if someone is a criminal, and if that person is harming someone could also mean like not necessarily killing someone, but isolating them, quarantining them. Let's say someone has a very infectious disease. You want to quarantine that person for their benefit and for everyone else's benefit. And that quarantining is also harm. Because, why should I live in house arrest? I deserve the same freedom as everyone else deserves in this world. But because I have a condition which affects myself and others, I need to accept this situation. So that is an example of causing harm, is quarantining, for example, so that is a positive thought. If it deals about quarantining a seriously infectious disease, then that's a positive thought because there's a larger benefit involved to the society in isolating that disease. Any other examples of positive thoughts? It seems that it is always relative. That what we call positive or negative is always relative. Let's talk about negative thought now. What would be an example of a negative thought?
Hatred, jealousy, greed. Hatred is the big one, which is why the world is a little bit slower in transforming than it could be, because hatred is it's non-diplomacy.
Okay, so we got hatred, greed, and jealousy. Any other universally accepted negative thoughts? By the way, we just found that there is no universally accepted positive thought. Universally means within this room. Within the universe of this room, we haven't found an acceptable positive thought so far. But there is some negative thoughts. Does anybody wants to comment on if those could be accepted as positive sometimes? Like jealousy, hatred, and greed? Could they be positive? Okay, well, let's move on. Any other negative thoughts? What do we understand? What is a negative thought? Comparison. Or are you talking about judgment? So being judgmental is negative. Okay.
But I have a question.
Yeah.
If it's just a thought, I could have a negative thought, but I don't act on it, or it doesn't really move. Where does that go? I could just maybe I don't like that person, but I still, nice to that person. Maybe I did. You don't act on negative thoughts.
So what is the process that leads thoughts into actions? Or is there a process that leads thought into action? In other words, if you think about something a lot, is it necessary that you will end up acting on that? What do you guys think? How many of you guys think yes? Oh, nobody thinks yes. Okay. Okay, well, there's two types of doing. One type of doing is thinking, another type of doing is doing. So let's say we think about something a lot, then is it likely that we are going to act on it?
It depends how much of a procrastinator you are.
If you're not, if you're very energized.
If the procrastinators, then it will take time. If it's something that you know is a positive action or positive results, in terms of acting on negative thoughts, that's the danger zone. That's why you have so much incarceration and people with serious drug addiction problems, being penalized for being sick, like that, because of the inaccuracy in understanding positive and negative energy, as the word I choose to use.
Yes, so these energies or thoughts of positive and negativity are very hard to be universally accepted because they need a larger context. And we are going from friendship, and we call a friend a good friend if they're giving positive energy or positive thoughts to our life and removing negative energy and negative thoughts from our life. However, we do not have a basis for that positive and negative thing. We do not have the basis for a positive energy, we do not have a basis for negative energy. So on what basis would we call a friend as a good friend? Hold on. So
Anything that promotes love is positive, and everything that promotes and increases hate is negative.
that could be one. Yes, go ahead.
Well, knowledge is explained in Bhagavatam as that which separates reality from duality, let's say, or the spirit from matter. So really, the friend that we can understand is the one that can put us in touch with the soul. Not only in touch with the soul, but give us work in the soul. That's because the soul is real, and then the rest of the body and the material world is not. So, but we get mistaken because we're also looking for fortune, Kalayanam, but we also want to be materially set up in comforts, right? So we also count those as our friends.
So that is bringing in the context of knowledge. We will come to that. That's a good point. We'll come to that in the end of the class. And somebody talked about love. You said love. So anything that has to do with love. this idea about love has been around forever, although it is being bounced around more. I think so. The understanding is the idea has become famous and popular because of a new thing that we're having these days is social media. That anybody could become a celebrity, or anybody could have attention to them, and if people talk about similar things, then they multiply and so on. But this idea of anything to do with love being positive, anything to do with hatred as negative, has been accepted and been around forever. However, we see that has not been working so well, and that's why as Shari was suggesting this time, that there is an increase in hatred. How can we see that? We can see several ways. We can see the number of wars increasing. We can see social injustices increasing, for example. And then we can see that although there is this acceptance in people's heart that yes, anything about love is positive, anything about hatred is negative, there is no motivation to practice that, or seems that there is big obstacles in actually living a life based on that, in choosing love over hatred. And one of the obstacles is the mind. Here we are talking about this negativity bias, which means that we absorb negative things faster than positive things. So a simple example is that you had a very nice dinner or lunch and something is stuck in your tooth. That and it's there for the next 2 hours. You don't have a toothpick, and that is going to bother you like anything for those 2 hours. Even if you are like in the most important meeting of your life, you're going to remember that little thing that is stuck in your tooth. That's a simple example of a negativity bias, but we have larger consequences of having that we absorb negative information faster. And of course, we might consider the media to be benefiting from this negativity bias that people have. Because if you present negative examples, then because you're attracted to more, you're more likely to watch more news, which is negative. And then you're attracted to it more, so you're more likely to watch more news, which is negative. So that is making money for someone. So based on how this mind is working, people are already making money. And that's how, for example, the advertisement business works. What does the advertisement business works on? It works on those two conditionings, classical conditioning and operant conditioning, which is Indriya, Priti and Karma. We talked about that. So that is how we are continuing to receive this education, or in other words, conditioning. Even in our adult life, we're being taught, helplessly taught by the media and by the world around us. So now we talk about this thinking. And we said that there is a larger context that needs to be defined. So you can say so which of this do you identify with? Are you an optimist or a pessimist? What are you? You like to see the positive side of things, you like to see the negative side of things, or you like to see the things? Okay, well, in this analogy, we're bringing them as opposites, which comparing them to positive and negative. So, which one do you identify with? So yeah, okay. Any other answers? Eight seconds passed. Come on, guys, be brave.
Factuals. I mean, actually, think of I'm half full, I'm half empty, and actually that I think this is this. They're all kind of within the context of they're factuals. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying that statement. So I think I'm opening up another can of worms. It's a factual statement.
All of these are factual statements. Yes. And the reason why people are encouraged to be positive is because if you think positively, you will not get depressed. Although there is every opportunity, and it's very realistic and very factual that things are negative, and you should become depressed if you see them. So there is this always a balance about what perspective I should build, and again it brings us to the point of having a larger context to build this. Do we see that in the one of the verses in the Gita describes the world as dukkale mashashvatam, which means that this is a place where there is a house of suffering, and that house of suffering is temporary, which means that there is also some happiness there. So this is the third category, more or less, that there is acknowledging that there is positive things, acknowledging that there is negative things, and then saying that all of that is temporary. So our experience involves that we have, based on our likes and dislikes, we experience positive things if they correspond to the like section of the brain, and negative things if they correspond to the dislike section, and then eventually find out that it is only illusory, it is only temporary. That is the perspective of the Gita, to balance this positive and negative extremes. So now the question you might ask is, let's take an example of, let's say you like eating a cake, okay? And one way to enjoy a cake is to just enjoy it. You just don't think too much and you eat the cake, right? And another way to eat a cake would be to think that, oh, look at this cake. This cake is a part of the world, right? And the cake is made up of many chemicals, and inside of those chemicals are many molecules, and inside that there's many atoms, and actually it's a bunch of hollow space covered by stuff which looks like a cake. And if I eat this cake is going inside my body, which is made of the same atoms and molecules, and that is going to give me some pleasure because there is a reward circuit in my brain which really likes sugar. And this reward circuit is going to get triggered by this sugar in the cake, and I'm going to feel happiness. So why eat it? Because it seems like I'm just like subjecting myself to a chemical experience. I want to have a real life experience. I don't want to have a chemical experience. So why eat the cake? And this is one extreme. And the other extreme is just forget all of this. Ignorance is bliss. Why care? Just eat cake. And just go and eat. So what happens, the first extreme is that we become habituated. That, let's say we are feeling depressed, sad, let's say sad, and then we find chocolate and we eat that chocolate. Does anybody have experience of doing that? When you eat sad, you eat chocolate. And now you eat that chocolate like this, by being in the moment with the chocolate and really enjoying it. And then next time you feel sad, your brain says, oh, well, last time, remember what you did? You ate a chocolate. So go get me one now. So you do exactly that. You go get another chocolate. So this is a very, very simple example of how habituation works. And there is other more destructive habituation patterns also, which have the similar beginning. Let's say with addiction with alcohol or drugs, for example, has the same beginning as eating a chocolate. So that is the problem with one of those extremes, to just be in the moment and enjoy. And the other extreme also has a problem. If you think that I'm going to analyze this chocolate, like threadbare, then and as a result, I'm never going to eat it. And then that is, at some point it'll drive us crazy. We'll start analyzing everything, each and everything, and each and every interaction. And then you look at someone you like. Let's say you like someone really, and they're your romantic partner. You look at them and think, oh well, this person's body, the skin is made of these subcutaneous layers, and beneath that there is muscle, and beneath that there is these gross organs, and beneath that there is a lot of blood, and there is some undigested food right there. Forgive me for that, but that is how we would think on the other extreme, and you just see through that person, and that person becomes transparent to your vision. That is, some yogis practice that kind of thinking. So which extreme would you choose? It seems that either of the extremes is going to lead us to a very, very difficult situation. Either we become habituated and addicted to every exciting stimulus that we receive in life, or we just become crazy and just like, how can such a person even live if they cannot have healthy interaction with the world? So what is the answer here? How do we interact with the world? And having this knowledge about the relativity, about how positive and negative means actually nothing outside the context that we have defined with our likes and dislikes. All the positive and negativity only has relationship within our mind, and there is no relationship beyond that. And then also having this knowledge of seeing matter as temporary. We just gave an example of how you see another person, especially a person you like, and you want to unite with them, you can see them in this way. So how would you balance, your life if this is the knowledge that we are receiving?
Based on the example that you just gave with the cake,
Mm-hmm.
and ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is the cause of most of the suffering in the world. So in the relationship to the examples you gave, and you answered your question yourself just now. Balance. You can have the cake, or you can have almond dream ice cream while you watch, not Charlie Rose, but the BBC World News every night. It's about balance, because you do it too much, then you develop diabetes. And when you're aware of that, you're not ignorant anymore. You know, if I have too many sweets, I'll become diabetic. That's not good. So you said it just now. It's balance, and balance is not an easy. It's not easy all the time to create balance.
Okay, so we are talking about balance between, so we do not want to go to either of these extremes, either become habituated and addicted, or become like a crazy detached person. Don't want to become either of those, so there is some component of balance. Any other thoughts of how you would deal with this? These are very day-to-day situations, right? You have people in your life whom you like, you have things in your life that you like and dislike. So based on this knowledge, which is undeniably true, it is the truth, how would you interact with the objects, and how would you interact with the people? And how could those interactions have a sustainable, if positive effect in our life?
Witness.
I'm sorry?
Witness.
So tell us more about it.
To witness whatever it is that is happening to us or outside.
So, for example, if you're eating a cake, you just try to, while you're having the enjoyment of eating a cake, you try to be the witness. So if you try that while eating a cake, you would never be able to eat it. I'm just going to witness it. But at some point, if you do not give in to the experience of actually having that little piece of sugar and flour in your mouth, then we have to kind of lose our position as a witness to enjoy something. So witness works when things are away, that when things are not, we're observing other people's lives. So I'm just witnessing how that person is so happy, or especially how that person is just so stupid. I can witness that very well, but to witness our own thoughts all the time, that seems to be very challenging, especially while interacting with the world. The soul, however, is the witness. And the super soul, which is an expansion of Krishna, is also a witness. But especially the super soul is known as a witness, because the super soul and the soul are like two birds sitting on a tree, and one of those birds is us, is a conditioned soul. Remember this conditioning we talked about? And this conditioned soul is just busy having fun with other conditioned souls on the tree, and has developed some parts of the tree that he likes or she likes, and other parts that they don't like, and they're busy interacting with that. But the super soul is only witnessing. That super soul has nothing to do with the tree. So, yes, so witness seems to be hard. Any other solutions here to this problem? Does everybody understand the problem? We have a problem here, like a serious problem. So think about it. Okay. So what is that middle path? Middle path would be you do the first one when the cake is away from you. You analyze it and you think about it, and you use all your knowledge and skills to look at it, and then you just go for it.
The middle part would be you have the knowledge that a lot of sugar is not good for you, but you don't eat the whole thing.
Oh, you eat, okay, that's an interesting point. So you eat only a little bit of the cake, and then you store it in the fridge, and then the next time you eat it again. But every time you have the same problem. How do I deal with this? Any solutions here?
When you start talking, when there's less control over what you're doing or thinking, then of course it becomes more of an addiction, the cake. Instead of realizing, yes, the sugar is bad for me, I'm only going to have, well, I say it, but I also participate in more sugar. I'm not really a sugar person, but
It's only an example. I wanted to have a child-friendly example. So what is that? It's a movie rating, which is good for children also. It's a movie rating where kids can also watch, like 4-year-olds. So this is a PG example. There is other PG or UG, I don't know. But this is an example. But there is, of course, other examples we understand, which are adult-only examples where we have this dilemma also about how we interact with this world and with respect to things and with respect to people.
I agree with you when you said, if I eat a little bit, if I have that control, then I put it back. Maybe I'll have it again later. But if I have that control and I'm not eating, I think I have kind of gone a long way. Because one, to eat it, but you have the control to not know that too much is sugar. Give up a little bit of it, put it away, have it again some other time. I think you're all right.
That's a very good point. So she's saying that practically that it brings down to regulating the life, regulating our life. That even though we may be very philosophizing about eating the cake or not, you usually end up eating it, no matter how hard you think. And that is the way in which the world is going. It is going in the way of choosing the first option, choosing the option of ignorance is bliss, about why care so much. And this is an intermediate option, which is regulation. And then there is another extreme, which is total detachment. And so what will really give us the power to regulate regulate our mind? It's already accepted that, regulation is good. If you talk to any sane person, they would say, yes, this is a very good idea. I am going to be forced to eat this cake, but I'm going to develop my mind such that I can control my mind at least sometimes, and I will eat it in a regulated way. And not go crazy, just like being detached and throwing the cake out of the window, thinking that it's an illusion. And the next thing is you could throw yourself out of the window, thinking that you're an illusion.
It's ultimately that awareness, and once that awareness is there, or developing awareness, then the extreme likes and dislikes are put into balance. But you're the neuroscientist, so when you like something a lot or you dislike something a lot, I don't know, I'm older now, so my experience is the more someone dislikes something, unless it's something truly to be contested, like socioeconomic injustice, or any number of things that relate to basic human dignity, right to life for animals, and the rest of it. But generally speaking, dislikes, heavy on the dislikes is, it's very ego involved.
Mm-hmm.
The likes also, but I think probably, I don't know if people like
Yes.
the dislikes.
I think it's like diet and lifestyle change. Diet is like a rule that wants to be broken. And people will say, well, I can have this cake today. Tomorrow I'll start the diet again. A lifestyle change is, let's say someone now, the doctor says, you can't have sweets when you're diabetic. And there's certain exchanges as a diabetic can have. So much bread, which is starch, everything turns into sugar. So there's those two differences, I think, can give us an answer. The diet, if I feel like it, I'll eat as much cake as I want, when I want, if I want. But the lifestyles change, which is something maybe that may be threatening. Meaning, you eat something, now you're at the emergency room. That right there will give you, will say to you, because you're going to learn. Maybe not at first.
So having long-term changes and having awareness are the 2 points that they've brought up. These are beautiful points. This is also a point which is this idea of cultivating knowledge, and through that detachment is used in all kinds of therapies, for example, where you go see to the person like that and you say that this is what's happening in my mind and blah, blah, blah. You tell everything. And then what do they teach you? They teach you based on knowledge how to cultivate detachment. But we have seen that if you take that to the extreme, you'll go crazy. And if you take your present lifestyle to the extreme, you'll also go crazy. So therefore, there is this undisputed, this problem has not been solved. This problem has been existing forever. More and more people are experiencing that problem in terms of the rise in mental illness, for example, anxiety-related mental illness. Not necessarily neurobiologically initiated mental illness like schizophrenia, etc., but anxiety and depression, lifestyle-related mental illness has been increasing. Suicidal ideation has been increasing. So therefore, the point that has been missed here is the point of seeing, the point which is there here in the Gita is point of seeing the divinity of the nature. That we see what is my relationship with the world and my relationship with the things in this world has a larger context. Actually, these things and these people do not belong to me, but they belong to someone higher than me. They belong to the Supreme, and so do I. So now this whole game turns around and becomes that becomes a spiritual vision. That, for example, I am seeing a person. I'm not necessarily liking this person because they intersect with my likes and dislikes, but I acknowledge the presence of God within that person. I acknowledge the super soul is in their heart, the same super soul is in my heart, and that is a definition of equality given in the Gita. We've talked about that before. So if we have this divine understanding and if we have this divine vision, then it is possible to have balance. Otherwise, we will go to either of those extremes. And now we talked about this lifestyle regulation. And I did talk about this briefly last time, so I want to end with this in a few minutes. So there is two things that we saw. We saw that there was a classical conditioning, which is based on instant gratification. You like something, you do it, and you feel happy. You like something, you do it, you feel happy. You like something, and you rinse and repeat this forever. That is instant gratification. And the other one we saw is delayed gratification, which is that you like something, but you still don't do it now. Because if you hold on to it, you're going to get a benefit later. So that is delayed gratification. And these are the two forces that a conditioned soul faces in this world. Just good to know, right? What are the things that we are having in our life? There is two forces. There are force of instant gratification or instant sense pleasure, and then a delayed gratification. And you see that in people's lives, in our own life, we could have put off things which are instantly gratifying for a much larger benefit. Like, for example, go to school. It's terrible. It sucks. But you still go there because you get a degree. And then based on that degree, you're told that, or you've seen people who have become successful people with those degrees and have earned big monies. And then the belief is that with that money, you would get a very good partner, you'd get a very nice place in this world and a very good house, etc., etc. And then there is another belief after that, is that this is going to bring me happiness. So because that is going to happen probably 30 years later, or who knows if it will happen ever or not. But because we have some hope that this happiness is going to come to me, I'm going to work hard from now and go to kindergarten and then go do this whole thing called life. So that is delayed gratification. So most of our lives is about instant gratification or delayed gratification. But if we want to bring about any regulation, then we want to regulate both of these. And in fact, we want to ideally not have either of these. And how can we ideally not have either of these is through this process of yoga. And the beginning of that process of yoga is by transforming our vision. Understanding, acknowledging that the world is not about me. That's a good news, right? This is the best positive news you could get today. That the world is not only about me. Yes, it is about you, but that's a little corner in the world. And that little world that we have created is anyways based on our perception. So if we say that the world is about me, which world are you talking about? Half of the people in the world don't even see your world. They have completely different perceptions. And other species don't see your world. So which world are we talking about when we say that the world is about me? But however, that is a default conditioning of the soul, which Srila Prabhupada translated as being the lord of everything that we survey, which means everything that is within my sensual perception, that is mine. And that means that this world is about me. So the beginning of yoga is that understanding that the world is not about me, but it's a shared space with other people. And not just that, but beyond that, it is a divine energy of Krishna or divine energy of God that I am a part of. And then I'm also part of the divine energy. The soul is also part of the divine energy. So there is a description given about this divine energy in the 7th chapter, which we'll come to later. So I want to know any reflections that you guys have from what we discussed about this whole idea about starting the mind of the mind being an enemy, and then going from the necessary understanding what this conditioned soul means and why the mind is an active is an important element in our life, that we cannot just ignore the mind. Either it is going to be our friend or going to be our enemy. In fact, what we saw in the verse is that the mind is going to remain an enemy. So if we don't do anything about it, that's its natural function. There should be no surprises if we end up in a mess at some point in our life, because we followed the mind, blindly followed the mind. And you can compare that behavior, for example, that a suggestion comes to me from my mind, and without much contemplation, it seems to adjust to my relative definitions, and I give in to that suggestion. And eventually I live my life like that. This kind of life it's very common today. This kind of life is very common across the species. Even like animals live this kind of a life, that their mind brings them suggestion, oh, this is a nice place. Let me go kick out this other tiger from this forest, because I'm going to mark this territory as mine. Because I have bigger claws and I can have sharper teeth, I can kick someone out from my territory. So this is one example of doing that. Another example would be, for example, for squirrels, for example, saving their nuts, which like we save our money in the banks. Squirrels have their own banks. So there is common behaviors based on instant gratification or delayed gratification. At one point I was thinking that animals only do instant gratification. But from the squirrel behavior, you can clearly tell that they have an idea of future benefit. How they can sacrifice their current. I used to have a pet. I kind of became pet. No, a squirrel became a pet for me in Houston, and this chipmunk actually used to come to my apartment, and every time she used to come, I used to feed her like chocolate chips and walnuts, and don't ask me what else I fed to the chipmunk. And then I remember that once she was full, she wouldn't just go away. She would just wait for more, and then go down and then bury that, dig a little hole and keep it there, and then come back for more. And it is very similar to human behavior that we see today. And so therefore, you can see a big overlap between human behavior and animal behavior, a very big overlap. And which is going to be there, that part of us is similar to the animals, but there is a part of us which is not similar. And one way of understanding that is what satisfies an animal species and what satisfies a human species. If, that's for that squirrel's example, if she gets enough nuts and chocolate chips to store, then she would not come again. But imagine like a human being who is given extra nuts or extra money, they're going to keep wanting to have more and more. Why would you stop? What? She was working me?
Well, when you stopped, and eventually she didn't continue to come. So I'm saying, as long as she knew she could get it, she kept coming. And that's the same thing with human beings. In other words, if you give money, and then the person says, oh, I'll pay you back, and then they come again, and you keep lending, they keep coming.
So that is an interesting situation that we are in as human beings, that we kind of have unlimited desires. I'm sorry to announce that, but we have unlimited desires. Does anybody disagree with that? Yeah. Do you disagree?
Hi, question for you.
Oh, question.
On YouTube, there's a phenomenal Prabhupada lecture on never trust your mind. And it's the Srimad Bhagavatam 563. My question is, when you talk about the mind, what are some practical things that you use to then deal with dealing with the mind, and then and submitting to and or being able to live out, for one, for regulated principles and other things that help us to purify ourselves to be able to grow in our advance in our Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't talked about that part, which is very important. I was hoping to get to it, is that this knowledge that we have talked about is helping us in cultivating detachment, is also recommended to cultivate detachment in the yoga tradition. However, there is also the knowledge which helps us to cultivate attachment. That is the knowledge within bhakti, which helps us to attach to the divine, attach to the supreme. And the reason why I was coming to that point is that we talked about this, I was talking about this soul of this human soul having potentially unlimited desires, which means that after a certain number of desires are fulfilled, you feel satisfied for some time, no questions about that. But after that time, it kind of, you kind of think, is this all? Is it all? Is it life about this? Maybe I could do this and the other thing. Maybe I could have another experience. Maybe I could have another kind of pleasure or increase the existing kinds of pleasure that I have. So that is there in the 9th canto in the Bhagavatam, for example, that if a person has all the different people in this world that they would like to enjoy sex with, or they have all the different monetary benefits and resources that they want, all the different kinds of finest food, etc., etc., still that person is not going to be satisfied with all those things and all those people. However, that is in contrast with an animal which becomes satisfied in a relatively limited setting. So to address this human problem, the suggestion given there is to discover this realization of the Atma, the realization of us being the soul. And somebody in the beginning was saying that this soul is full of eternity, is eternal, it is full of knowledge and bliss. So how do we actually excavate that bliss outside and experience it as we live in the body and the mind? And that is done through the process of yoga, and specifically what we do, for example, what we are about to do in a few minutes is do the chanting, which is a mantra meditation, which is meant to connect us with the soul and meant to bring that higher pleasure to a tangible reality. And because of having that higher pleasure, which compares in the Pavlov's example to the food, we will have this diminishing habituation, which means that we will become detached from the whistles that have been blowing crazy in our life. And then that is a practical way to deal with it. So first thing is to accept, just like be honest and accept our position. And the second is to understand our needs of ever-increasing pleasure. That's a fact. There's no problem with that. But the problem is we don't know where to find it. So here's a suggestion about where to find such pleasure. And that pleasure can only be found on a spiritual level, not on a material level. Because the spiritual level, the spiritual experiences match with the nature of the soul, whereas the material experiences don't match with the nature of the soul. It's a mismatch. So we are trying to find eternal things in a place which constantly changes, which is a place which is hard to believe even if it is real or not. We are trying to find knowledge where things are very relative, right? And then we are trying to find bliss where pleasure is temporary. So therefore there is a mismatch. So activating our spiritual practice through the chanting process is an example of finding this higher pleasure which can sustain us beyond the conditioning. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Yes.
Are you equating desire with interest?
Yeah, you have to tell me more. With interest meaning like with interest to enjoy it?
The desire for cupcake or the desire for any number of different things may not be the same vibe mentally as an interest to do something or go somewhere or help someone. Then interest and desire have they're different, right?
So that desire is called as Adhyatma in Sanskrit, is a collection, a database of all impressions. It's a big file. It has many, many terabytes of data in it. It's the database from multiple impressions is called Adhyatma. That is stored in what some people call a subconscious mind. That is there with every person. And the activation of those desires, which you can call as interest, is karma. The process, the mechanical rules of the universe, one of those rules is karma, which helps to activate those impressions and allows the soul to fulfill those desires. So yes, they are distinct in a subtle way. Make sense? Any other comments or reflections? Anything that strikes to you from this conversation today? Maybe like one thing? Maybe two? There could be three things. I'm open to that.
The person laying down that's a battery with the psychologist, you should send that to the White House.
Which one? Oh, this one.
That one. That would be perfect to send to Donald Trump.
So, thank you. Anything that you guys want to take home, like anything that's stuck to you in the with your mind, in your mind? Maybe there is something that we finally got out of this, right? There is a possibility, believe me, that we got something out of this discussion. So let's try to be positive and let's try to share that so that others can understand, because everybody has gotten different things out of it based on their perspective. So if you share, then others can benefit. So who would like to share one thing that stuck to them or they would like to carry home? Yeah.
Don't trust the mind.
That's a good one. So don't trust the mind. Okay, anything else?
Let thoughts come and go, but concentrate on Krishna.
Okay, that's a very good point. We talked about don't trusting the mind, and where we talked about this duality of this almost like bipolar nature of the mind. Making good suggestions, making bad suggestions at the same time, and driving us crazy. So not trusting is a good idea. And a practical suggestion is to have a friend who represents the mind outside of us. So a beneficiary who has a spiritual vision also at the same time, so that we can do a double take, or we can confirm what is going on in our mind with the other person. So yes, that's a good point. And you said not let the thoughts come and go, but focus on Krishna. So we talked about this higher pleasure also, without which it seems like impossible for a human being to be happy in this world without experiencing this better and better pleasure which increases. Yes. Anything else?
But when the mind rebels, because the mind rebels, right? When it looks for excuses and that's a way of rebelling to then what can be the way to bring it back? To say, I'm very objective to say, no, you are just looking for excuses, there is no...
That's a very good point. So that we talk about that in bringing it back is in terms of bringing regulation, but bringing in two kinds of experiences in life. We have one kind of experiences which we don't have to do anything very difficult about, which is having experiences of pleasure and pain in the world. That is a given. But bringing in another experiences, which is an experience of spiritual pleasure in our life, simultaneously while we're experiencing material pleasure and pain, which is not going away anyways. So it's not that we are, becoming like that crazy person who is extremely detached or fanatically detached. We cannot, even if we want, we cannot be that person most likely. So, but we want to bring in this another element of spiritual pleasure which will help us to balance out our seeking of happiness within material pleasure. The problem is that we are confining our happiness to be derived, to be growing from our material activities, from our material pleasure and pain. And we want to transfer that responsibility to our spiritual activities and look for happiness there instead of looking for happiness. Yes, thank you. Any other? We have like one more minute. So any quick takeaways? Believe me, there is something. Any quick takeaways? Yes.
No, I just want to mention also, use negative and positive. Because also, like, the negative, I'm on the philosophy, I have a book on it, actually.
Do you want to close the door in the back?
Negative also in this realm is also good, believe it or not, because we're trying to be negative in the sense of not hankering for our own material pleasure or our own material positions. So in a sense, that's negative. Trying to negate
So yes, we talked about that also. That's a very good point, that given having defined a larger context, the positive and negative can make sense. Otherwise, it's like a child playing within their own world. That not being aware of the larger reality that is there in our life. So having that spiritual context is very important. So thank you very much. I believe that we have to stop here and continue to the next part, which is going to be a mantra meditation, which we will do for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have dinner in the back. So please stay for that. Thank you. So what we want to do during this mantra meditation is try to stay with one mantra at a time, either the one you're hearing or the one you're saying. It is going to be a call and response style meditation. So our motto is one mantra at a time. So whenever the mind wanders, just bring it back to the mantra. Thank you. Again.